So this month we're focusing on the hip. So the hip is a big ball and socket joint. As a ball and socket joint, it's capable of tremendous ranges of motion. Unfortunately, as North Americans, most of us spend too much time sitting. The average North American worker sits for 6.5 hours a day. So even though we have the capability of creating hip motion, a lot of us end up losing that hip range. And we always talk about the fact that that's then going to have consequences on your knee, and especially consequences on our back. When we look to see people bending over to reach and get anything, I want this sequence of very stable spine and rotation from my hips, not a stiff hip and rotation from my spine. So maintaining that mobility becomes very, very important. We've talked in the past in other newsletters about doing hip flexor stretches. So coming down on one knee, tilting our pelvis, squeezing our glute to create a little bit of extension of the hip and get a good stretch down the front of the hip to loosen up those tight muscles from sitting. We can also do glute stretches where we bring our leg forward, again keeping our back very neutral. We're not going to let ourselves round out here. I can stretch out any stiffness or tightness I have in the back of the hip. So those are simple stretches we can do to reclaim some of that hip mobility. I can even work on stretching out my hamstrings with that same principle. Again, if I look at bending forward from my hips, I don't have to move very far forward at all to create a really good hamstring stretch and loosen up some of the muscles that attach to the back of the hip. This being golf season, again, that's a great kind of initial thing for golfers, is that idea that when I address the ball, I want to be bending primarily from my hips, not getting to the ball by rounding my back. That's going to decrease performance and risk injury. But the bottom line, whether you're a golfer or just the average person, is as we transition from reclaiming that mobility in our hip, we have to do exercises that teach us that good rhythm between our hip and our spine. We've talked about this in other newsletters where looking at deadlifting, the ability to hinge from our hip with a very neutral spine to pick up a load or a weight, whether it be a bar or a kettlebell. So strengthening our glutes, working on our core, but keeping that great position between my spine and my hips. Here's the kicker. You can be awesome at deadlifting and still hurt your back because it doesn't matter how much weight I deadlift. If I drop my keys and I forget about the deadlifting and I allow myself to bend from my spine, it's a question of when, not if, you blow out your back. So the whole point of exercise is to make the rest of your life easier. If we become really good at deadlifting or stretching our hamstrings or getting that hip mobility, I got to know that when I go to pick up those keys, it doesn't take any extra time for me to maintain that position of my spine. It's always in the back of my mind that every time I bend, I do it by using the mobility of my hip and keeping my spine stable.